All right, let's dive right in here. Ceuta, for those unfamiliar, some call it Ceuta. There's a bunch of different pronunciations, but I generally say Ceuta. It's a tiny Spanish enclave sitting on the northern coast of Morocco. It's a 6-mile-long peninsula that Spain has governed for centuries, functioning as an actual land border between the African continent and the European Union. But on Wednesday and Thursday of this week, that border simply ceased to exist. The video footage was nothing short of shocking. It showed crowds of people, mainly young Moroccan men, we'll find out why in a moment, swimming around what's called the Tarahal breakwater using inflatable tubes and makeshift flotation devices, while others broke straight through a border gate on land and sprinted into Spanish territory entirely unopposed. Ceuta's regional government president said that the horde of migrants hit like a tidal wave. Spanish state broadcaster TVE estimated originally approximately 2,000 to 3,000 people crossing the border in the first hours. And then the dam broke. Tens of thousands flooded the city. Ceuta's own government said that the number couldn't even be confirmed because the border had, in his words, quote, completely collapsed. There was, and in many ways even is, effectively no longer a border between Africa and Europe right now. By this morning, aggregate reporting on the border invasion put the total number at approximately 60,000 people crossing from Morocco in this one tiny Spanish enclave. If you don't know, Ceuta is made up of about 85,000 residents. They've doubled overnight. Needless to say, almost immediately, right, cars were set ablaze. Injuries were reported among both migrants and security forces during the chaos. 34 people have been confirmed dead as a result of all of this, most of whom, by the way, drowned at sea. Migrant reception centers are reported to be, get this, at a 2,400% of capacity. 2,400% of capacity. Thousands of migrants right now as we speak are sleeping on sidewalks and public parks because of the overflow. There's simply nowhere left to put them. Now, as of this morning, Spain has deployed armed forces to the Moroccan border, increasing air and naval support and sending diving teams to patrol the waters. Roughly 200 specialized police officers and 60 additional troops arrived from the Spanish mainland to reinforce Ceuta's overwhelmed local forces. The European Union has itself offered to send what's called Frontex. It's its own border and coast guard agency to help Spain reestablish order. A genuinely remarkable gesture from Brussels, given their commitment to open borders for the last decade. And yet, even with soldiers now patrolling those beaches, Madrid, Spain's socialist government, as of this morning, still refuses to formally declare a national emergency. The Interior Ministry's official position is that migration flows do not qualify as a risk to national security under Spanish law. I'm going to say that again. According to this far leftist socialist official in Madrid, Spain cannot be invaded, technically speaking. Migration flows simply do not qualify as a risk to national security under Spanish law. So apparently you can invade Spain and it's cool. That, in a nutshell, is exactly the reason why all of this is happening in the very first place. Now, there was something specifically that precipitated this mass breach, particularly this week. It was actually a false rumor that got spread throughout Morocco that the border between Morocco and Spain would be temporarily opened. Okay, so that rumor drew crowds, big crowds. And when Moroccan security personnel guarding the fence unexpectedly withdrew, hundreds of young migrants scaled the unguarded fencing and walked straight into Ceuta. And then again, reportedly, a number of human trafficking and people smuggling networks actively exploited or probably even started the rumor. And they organized thousands upon thousands of Moroccans, particularly young men, to cross the border. Now, why young men? Well, one of the reasons for that is because, look, Morocco is a great country. Morocco, I hope to visit there sometime. I just from the vantage point of just looking at its domestic statistics, it is an oasis of societal and cultural order in an otherwise pretty volatile continent. But Morocco's laws are very strict, and their penalties are very severe for lawbreakers. Who do we see crossing this border predominantly? It's young men. Young men who are the most likely, they're the demographic, to end up on the wrong side of those severe legal punishments. Whereas Spain is seen, I'm sorry to say it, but they're just seen to be seen as just placid and therapeutic and accommodating, and a refusal to offend anybody from the third world, as it were. So it seems to be a combination of this rumor that spread that the border was being temporarily opened, and that young men are now, who are crime prone, those who are crime prone, could actually find a field day for criminal activity that is never met with anything even remotely as harsh as Moroccan penalties. That's what we seem to know so far in terms of what particularly precipitated this event this week. But, and this is absolutely key, and I already gave away a lot of it, it's now being widely acknowledged, even among Europeans, that it's Spain's own far left woke immigration laws that ultimately invited this. Now, if you don't know, there are two things that happened in Spain that seem to precipitate precisely this crisis at the border. First, back in January of this year, Socialist President Pedro Sanchez's government approved a royal decree bypassing parliament entirely, mind you, because his coalition doesn't even remotely have the votes to pass it through normal legislative channels. But he approved a royal decree to give amnesty to 500,000 illegal migrants already living inside Spain. If you don't know, a royal decree in Spain is basically the equivalent of an executive order, okay? Pedro Sanchez's council of ministers drafted and approved this migrant, what they call regularization, I can say that, regularization measure. They approved it unilaterally without a prior parliamentary vote, precisely because Sanchez's coalition does not have the votes to guarantee passage through Spain's Congress of Deputies. Sanchez, I'm not going to go down a rabbit trail here, but Sanchez, you have to remember, is very, very unpopular in Spain. In fairness to the Spanish people, they did not vote for this. You should know that. Yes, in a parliamentary system, ultimately they did. I get it. But they actually voted Sanchez and the Socialist Party out of power in their last election. His government was voted out. Spaniards wanted a change. They had a chance. They could have voted for Fox, but they didn't. That's their one problem. But nevertheless, or what's the other one? Podema, or so the center right party. But again, they could end up playing footsies with these same policies as well. But nevertheless, they voted the socialist administration out. But Sanchez turned around and finagled the parliamentary process And he ended up forming a governing coalition with the Catalan Separatist Party, and that kept him in power. So he's not supposed to be in power, technically speaking. And that's why he's been called the most unpopular man in Spain. Now, and I'm assure you, if he was the most unpopular man in Spain on Monday of this week, I assure you, he don't know what unpopularity was back in Monday, right? So, nevertheless, he signed this executive order granting amnesty to 500,000 illegals. I guess he needed votes, right? Interestingly, Spain's own National Center for Immigration and Borders, they estimated that's bunk. It wasn't 500,000 who were getting amnesty. The real, again, this is Spain's own National Center for Immigration and Borders. They estimate, no, it's actually more like 1 million. 1 million people are going to get amnesty. The application window ran right through June of this year, so literally just weeks ago. And then all you have to do, if you think it through, just like what we had here in 86 with Reagan's worst mistake of his presidency when he signed amnesty off in 86. Think through the incentive structure that this creates. And it's not complicated. If you're a young man in Morocco or anywhere across North Africa, weighing whether to risk your life swimming across a breakwater to bypass border barriers to get into a European nation, and that nation has just told the entire world it's willing to grant blanket legal status, work permits, healthcare cards, and a path towards citizenship to anyone who simply shows up and waits 5 months. I mean, you don't need a smuggler to explain the math to you. Italy's own foreign minister said it plainly just the other day. He said the images coming from Ceuta show how the Madrid government's decision to grant Spanish citizenship and therefore European citizenship because of the Schengen Protocol, we'll get into that in a moment, to grant that citizenship to over 500,000 illegal migrants is profoundly wrong, morally wrong, and it encourages human trafficking. It encourages the very behavior that every healthy nation on the planet has always sought to limit. That's what's so key. This far left socialist policy of granting amnesty to 500,000 illegals rewards and therefore encourages crime. It encourages the crime of illegal migration. Can you even imagine a CNN roundtable with Abby Phil? It's technically not a crime. Illegal immigration's technically not a crime. I mean, what human civilization ever even remotely thought in those categories? How does a $1 billion organization like CNN actually take crap like that seriously? It's beyond me. I literally don't get, I'm sorry to be a little passionate here. I think we're all a little passionate from what we're seeing. I don't give a rat's ass how you want to frame this. Oh, but they've been here for years. Oh, but that illegal, that's a grandmother sitting in your church pews. Oh, all they want is just a better life. I don't give a flip. I don't know how much empathetic nonsense you want to spew out. It only ends up rewarding and thereby encouraging illegal activity. Make it legal. Make it legal. Open up your borders legally. Do it. And then, of course, within a year, you're not going to have a country anymore. Your country will be taken over by another country, and they'll be flying their flags the whole time. And not to mention how you encourage radically abusive human trafficking that comes with this. It's so, but they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable to human traffickers because of your suicidal empathy. So that's the first thing to get. I'm just getting started. I'm just getting warmed up. This leftist Spanish government gave out mass amnesty just months ago. If you want a lesson of what mass amnesty can give you, there it is. It's happening right now in Spain. But that wasn't the only thing that happened. It wasn't just the presidential administration that dropped, I can't even say dropped the ball here, that failed the Spanish people. It was also their far left Supreme Court. It was their judiciary. Surprise, surprise, right? What is it with the West and our judiciary? We have to talk about that sometime. I know what it is. It's a shift from natural law to what's called positivist law that happened in all the law schools all across the West, where they basically effectively became left-wing activists disguised as jurists. Nevertheless, Spain's Supreme Court issued a ruling earlier this month that gutted the country's ability to immediately turn back migrants intercepted at sea. You're not going to believe this. I mean, I had to read this twice. So for years, Spain had what's called I think it's called the rechazo en frontera. I think I'm saying that right. Let me know, my dear Spanish speakers. Rechazo en frontera. That's their immigration policy. It literally means rejection at the border, right? Rejection at the border. So that meant that migrants who physically climb over land fences at Ceuta or Melilla, that's the other border city there, can be summarily returned to Morocco on the spot. No problem. Their far left court just weeks ago ruled that this special fast-track expulsion does not apply to anyone intercepted, I kid you not, on water. If you are intercepted swimming or floating, that policy of catching and returning does not apply to you. Now, the court's own reasoning was comically bureaucratic. It said that drones, thermal cameras, and sensors can detect a swimmer, but because they don't physically stop them the way a fence does, sea crossings fall outside the summary return law entirely. In other words, they may not have known they did anything wrong, right? It's an Abby Phillip thing. Well, they didn't know. They didn't know. They weren't trying to do anything wrong. They were just floating around on their floaty in the middle of the ocean, and then they just ended up in Europe. If that makes sense to you, you probably belong in an insane asylum. And it literally took only hours for human smuggling networks to actively exploit that judicial loophole to encourage sea crossings over land crossings, because everyone in the business now knows a swimmer gets due process, which takes months upon months, if not years, while a fence climber gets sent back immediately. I mean, you could literally not design a more perfect invitation for human smuggling gold rush if you tried. Now, you put those two decisions together, a mass amnesty program dangling legal status in front of the entire African continent, and a court ruling that specifically tells smugglers, just get them in the water. That's all they need. And what you get precisely is what we've been seeing all week at Ceuta. To claim this was predictable would be the understatement of the century. I mean, this is what we are seeing happening right now in Ceuta is precisely what happens when you have this broken incentive machine that Pedro Sanchez's government built with its own hands. And keep in mind, because of the Schengen Agreement, what? Who knows? You guys know it. Put it in the chat. What's the Schengen Agreement? Because of Schengen, these illegal migrants who are being granted all these rights and privileges because of that Supreme Court ruling, they're now free to explore the whole wider European continent. 29 European countries honor the Schengen Protocol, where entrance into one of their countries allows entrance into all. But not so fast. Not according to leaders all across the continent. To their credit, they're rising up. Even the bullies in Brussels aren't having any of this. The calls to push back against this feckless left-wing Spanish government are echoing all across Europe. And it looks as if this latest invasion crisis is finally waking up Europe once and for all.